Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoy. The Psychology Talk podcast is a unique conversation about psychology from around the globe. We bring you ideas from mental health practitioners and experts to keep you informed about the latest issues and trends. Topics include developments and research in psychotherapy and social sciences, hypnosis and mind-body treatments, meditation and spirituality, and new treatment modalities. And while you're listening, please take a moment to subscribe and give us a review at your favorite streaming site. It helps us to grow and further reach people with quality programming. And now, here's the episode. Hello, everyone. Today, my guest is once again Mark O'Connell. Mark is a licensed clinical social worker and an actor. He holds degrees in social work from Hunter College in New York City, as well as an MFA in acting from the Trinity Rep Conservatory. He's also the author of The Performing Art of Therapy, which we have discussed about a month ago on this podcast, which is a wonderful book. That's available from Routledge Press. He is also the author of Modern Brides and Modern Grooms, a guide to planning straight, gay, and other non-traditional 21st century weddings. Happy Pride Month, and welcome back to the podcast, Mark.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm going to read something. Maybe this hopefully won't spoil, but this is kind of like how I was summing up the book as I was thinking about it. When things are just abided by us unconsciously, we lose sight of intention and meaning. Mm-hmm. Your book reaffirms and reinvigorates the idea of the wedding as a meaning-making social event, just as theater is, especially participatory theater. In essence, the legalization of same-sex marriage has afforded everyone the opportunity to think outside the box regarding their marriages and social constructs and contracts. It's freeing for everyone.
Oh, wow. I love that. I feel like you get it. You get what I was up to.
Yeah, it's a fun book.
Oh, thank you.
Fun book. We'll place it back. We were talking about a little bit earlier. You said it was published in 2014.
Yeah.
And basically 2015. What were the legal constructs that were changed or added to or interpreted differently?
Exactly. So it was sandwiched in between there, the publication between 2013 when the Supreme Court struck down DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, and 2015 when marriage equality became legal federally across the country. And so it was highly relevant at the time of its publication. And it, I felt like over the past couple of years, people think of it as maybe passé, like the idea of, it was no longer sexy to think about it anymore. We'd been fighting for it, talking about it for way too long. And then we moved on, except now we're in this political position where it's becoming, unfortunately.
Yes. As we record this today, it was let loose that the Supreme Court has struck down Roe v. Wade as a federal institution or law. Yeah. So we can only imagine. Pundits are kicking this soccer ball around with that all over the interwebs and the media right now as we speak. So I think your book has instantly become relevant, and that it's relevant for a lot of reasons. Ooh. But even if it hadn't become more relevant, perhaps by the way things are being constitutionally, literally interpreted by the Supreme Court and others, I think it's still relevant based on what I said. What about my little intro to the book? I think it's a way to help you think outside of the box about a social construct. It's kind of like money. Everybody has issues with money. Everybody has issues with marriage and weddings and planning them and et cetera. And it works up a whole lot of stuff. Religion. You don't talk about weddings or religion at the dinner table, right?
But that's what I'm up to here is how can you give yourself space to reflect on what the meaning, as you say, what the meaning is for you, so that you can participate, so that you can actually be in your life and with whoever you are, with as much freedom as possible. You give yourself more aliveness and freedom when you focus on, what is this event? What does it mean to me? And from there, then I can determine how I want to participate, And it's interesting because with the backdrop of the Supreme Court becoming heading in this very literal direction, which places us back in a certain time and in a certain set of values. I'm trying. What I'm up to with the book is to remind us of what our lives are actually about, and how. As opposed to an idea of what we think they're supposed to be about. And if you look at, actually, it's very interesting to look at the opinions from the marriage equality decision of 2015, because you see the majority opinion, Kennedy's opinion. He's not even talking about law as much as he's talking about cultural practice and life. And he talks about love and the expansion of self that marriage offers each of us. And that's the value he wants to share. He thinks we should all share. Everybody should have that opportunity. And what's interesting is that the dissenting opinion, Scalia's dissenting opinion, he doesn't challenge him legally. He doesn't even challenge him in terms of the Constitution. What's interesting is that he challenges him in terms of the cultural idea of marriage, and says, well, surely if you talk to anyone who's married, it's more constricting than it is expansive. And it's very interesting because he actually ends up making the same point that Kennedy is making, which is that marriage really ought to be and can be expansive. And I feel bad for Scalia, he's, rest in peace. But, at the time my husband said, I feel bad for his wife, but
Ouch.
but really he's owning the fact that he did not find freedom and expansion and joy in his marriage, but you can. And culturally, I think we're finding that we can, no matter who we are. And that's what the marriage equality decision represented, even more than just a law or just rights or just reference to the Constitution. It was about acknowledging that we can find a great deal of freedom and aliveness through our relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's what the book is getting to, right? Yeah, it's getting to that idea of making conscious decisions about relationships and how to live your life and how to be a good citizen at the same time. It kind of goes back and forth from the more structural, big picture idea of marriage to how it affects people interpersonally, with some really nice examples from your personal life, from your friends who you've been allowed to kind of quote, and some of your clinical experiences as a psychotherapist. Yeah. One of the things I noted at the beginning of it was that you kept referencing your Uncle Dan.
Yeah.
Who was I think he's more around my age, possibly. And like when I was growing up in high school and college, only super, there was kind of like an anathema. It was like this kind of, if you had gay friends, it was like you had a cool friend who was like doing things that were like breaking all sorts of boundaries. And it was almost like bifurcated from what norms were. And you kind of described that. Maybe you can kind of like talk a little bit about how your own experience of growing up in a more accepting culture, or a little bit more accepting culture, versus maybe your older generations of LGBTQ folks.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Uncle Dan was always out as far as I knew, and was very accepted in my family and very beloved. And at the same time, there was always this sense that it was a category of that he was a certain kind of person, and so that it was accepting, but there is that sort of there is still that kind of contradiction there. When we don't all have full rights, we're still kind of marginalized in a certain sense. And so there was a way in which, even though there was that acceptance, I didn't really want to necessarily identify with him because it was different. It wasn't, he didn't represent to me finding my full self. He represented, a certain kind of person who would be accepted. But I'll never forget at my wedding, after years of kind of getting to know him and knowing about our lives as adults, which was kind of a wonderful experience, that he said, I never thought I would see a day like this, because it represented to him all kinds of freedoms that would help him bust out of that sort of category of person I was talking about, that he was thought of. And so that became one of the drives in writing the book too, is thinking about Uncle Dan and people in Uncle Dan's position who really internalized this idea that, okay, you might be tolerated, but you don't get to enjoy the freedoms that everyone else does.
Yeah. Do you think that's changed quite a bit? I mean, I think from a straight, I guess, perspective, I think I've seen the cultural shift to more acceptance, and it's less of a radical fringe of society and more of just kind of, it is what it is.
I think it's changing, but it's interesting because when this book first came out, I had really very loving liberal family members smile in that way, that slightly condescending smile, and say, "Oh, it looks great. There's the same-sex couple that I know, and I think maybe they'll find it useful." And it's interesting the way people's minds, as accepting as we've become. There's still that thing I was saying about the way Uncle Dan was thought of in terms of like, oh, you're that kind of person. It's, it's still in there. And really what I'm trying to do with this book is explode all of that for everyone's benefit. Not even the motivation, honestly, isn't just advocacy. That's not where it ends. It really does. As you said in the beginning, I want everyone to feel alive and free. And when we enjoy privileges at the expense of other people not enjoying them, then we're not really free. There's always going to be a part of ourselves that we're kind of pushing out and sort of, right?
Yeah. No, that's true. And in a way, I mean, I think that people had kind of a perception that the theatrical was the only thing that gay people could do or LGBTQ folks could do, which, it's like Carnival or Mardi Gras, like lifestyle. I don't think that's true. Right. People have to sleep and pay bills too. I mean, right. So, but that being said, there is something that I think all societies kind of require, that difference or other kind of like a space where you can party, a Halloween atmosphere or a kind of an other space, which I think there is something positive with that in society, to have that kind of otherness, right? Because it allows it kind of breaks up your assumptions about life, and it also allows you to understand, I guess, a kind of Apollonian versus a Dionysian perspective, if you will.
Yeah, and any opportunity as an individual to claim your space, what Winnicott would call the capacity to be alone, is really important.
Yes.
And that's what I try to do in the book. You were saying in terms of like couples therapy advice, in a way, I'm trying to encourage each couple to look at their individuality, and to look at the wedding planning process as an opportunity to navigating for all of the challenges, which are going to include taking up space. How do I take up space and claim space for myself, and consider what I need to feel fully alive, so that we can become interdependent. And then from there, as a couple, how do we relate to our families? How do we relate to our communities? And how do we invite them to be alive with us? And so that always begins with you having, finding a way, however you need to do it, to find your aliveness first.
Okay. Yeah. Well, maybe you can, maybe we can kind of touch on this idea of attachment, and I think it was Hendricks, right? Harville Hendricks, and the idea of like that you kind of the construct you have from a nice little construct of, and was it engulfment and abandonment?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about that
Well,
if you
want
to.
I should say I have an aversion to schematic ideas and prescriptive ideas.
I know people in the audience love it. So
I know they do. And there's even a quiz that my editor made me put in.
Your editor made you do it.
She did.
All right. Okay. Naughty,
but
naughty.
I think quizzes are fun. But it's those ideas, engulfment and abandonment is an idea that I derive from Harville Hendricks, who does the imago therapy for couples work. And it's the idea that in every couple, there's this complementary relationship of, complementary needs, so that one person's emotional development inevitably involves some form of overwhelming engulfment, whereas the other person experienced some form of overwhelming abandonment. And of course, it's more nuanced than that, but you do tend to find, and you do start to see patterns as a couples therapist, that all couples really do ultimately fall into those roles, arguably. And it can be useful, not to limit yourself, but just to think about owning yourself, like couples therapy 101. How do I make I statements? What's going on with me? Sometimes couples fall into the trap of thinking that they're both supposed to be emotionally mature in exactly the same way. And it overlooks the fact that we have different needs and they're complementary. That's why we were attracted to each other. So it's a matter of figuring out what we're up to. Where am I coming from? What's familiar to me, but also what's frustrating about that familiarity, and how do I transcend it? How do I use the relationship to transcend that frustration? So if I was engulfed and I felt kind of smothered, I'm eventually going to, what I want to do is master that so that I feel like my partner can follow my lead, and the abandoned person, recognizes they had to always sort of take care of themselves emotionally, and their dream is to eventually be taken care of by their partner. And so it's a fun exercise when you think of it that way, because then you're helping each other get to the other side of finding your full self. So it's challenging though, of course, because you want what's familiar to you. It's also interesting as a parent because you can, when you're aware like this and you're a clinician, you start to think, oh, well, I don't want to make any of those mistakes. Of course, they're not mistakes. It's just descriptive. It's just context. We're all going to be either smothering parents or abandoning parents in some way. So I knew I was going to be a smothering dad. But it was really funny. So I've been hugging and kissing and just smothering my child since he was born. I knew the day would come, and it did, where he was just like, "Dad," at night, just go away.
Did you handle that okay? Were you able to like, how was that?
I had a pang, of course, of narcissistic injury, but I was anticipating it because I think in these terms, and I was like, you know what? That's it. That's the kind of thing that's the engulfed person, saying, all right, I need to claim some independence. So we do that very thing in our relationships, and it's helpful to be mindful of how we're doing it, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. So you have that in there, and some examples of how that plays out, perhaps kind of like more the microscope kind of way of looking how the individual is affected by this navigating wedding planning. Right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you can give some examples of like what's engulfment and what's abandonment, like a specific example. I know you don't want to dichotomize thing, and the book is about not doing that, but but if you were to give an example, what would you like to give as an example? Maybe within the context of the
of planning an event, of planning a wedding. Mm-hmm. Well, the example I give in the book is my mom interfering with our wedding planning. And
your mother was concerned, Mark.
She was concerned in a very, very invasive way. about
maybe she was concerned about more of her stuff than your stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
She was like, okay, we really started talking about I think we just said, okay, we plan on walking down the aisle. And she said, now hold on. I don't want this to be an Elton John wedding. I was like, okay, wait a minute. No one talked about sequins yet. What's going on? And she, this self-consciousness about like, what's a same-sex wedding? What is my family going to think was starting to interfere? And the difference between the engulfment and abandonment, I think, was in the differences between how Justin and I responded to it. She was talking to the two of us. And, for me, I was so used to being engulfed by my mother that I kind of wanted to be rescued from the dilemma. I wanted Justin to step in and be like, no, and to kind of argue with her in a way that would shut it down and make her validate me. But he, kind of as the abandoned person, I think he wanted, he wanted, so he did do that. I think that was his initial reaction. But it was frustrating for both of us because ultimately what I wanted was the independence, right, of having my voice be heard. And ultimately what he wanted was not to have to be in that position of being the advocate and being relied upon as the advocate. And that happens in wedding planning, oftentimes in heterosexual situations. And it's the woman is doing all the planning is typically I've seen a lot of heterosexual couples in couples therapy. And that can happen with parenting too, co-parenting. And there's this building resentment, like, oh, he thinks it's his role to not participate. So,
I haven't the foggiest idea what you're talking about.
Not that, which isn't to say that every woman is the engulfed. It doesn't work that way in terms of gender, but just as an example, it's in that idea of how do you figure out how to transcend what you're used to when you recognize that it's actually frustrating for both of you, and how can you kind of help each other out to try the other thing, to be more of the one who's taking the lead, and to be someone who's being more kind of emotionally and allowing themselves to be loved, allowing themselves to be cared for without having, because that's important too. That's an important way to express love is to allow people to take care of you sometimes. What's that Aretha Franklin song? Ain't no way for me to love you if you don't let me.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's about, again, it's about being conscious of what you're doing rather than reacting and coming from a place of present tense and openness. Yeah. Well, theater, wedding as theater. Is it kabuki theater? Is it?
It could be.
It could be anything
open.
You want. Yeah,
that's what I think is so great about weddings. I think there's such a focus in the industry, which I've never cared about the wedding industry. I wrote this book because when you're denied something, you become an expert on it. Like if you can't visit your family in the hospital, you become an expert on the healthcare industry. So I became an expert on weddings only because we had to fight for ours for so many years. Mm-hmm. But as far as theater goes, we think of weddings as result oriented affairs, and in fact, it's gotten so crazy that way. I'm hearing from people that it's about the video now. It's only about the video to the exclusion of the interactions in person. So it's about this curated affair that you spend a lot of money on, not really being present and enjoying it and interacting with people, but then watching it, watching the two-dimensional result later. And so when there's this result, when you think of it in terms of it's what Peter Brook would call deadly theater. The legendary director Peter Brook, he would call it deadly theater because it's that kind of commercial theater that's only thinking about the result and the audience expectations, and not at all about what it's about. It could just be an empty space with two people exchanging attention, and that would be incredibly meaningful and life-changing, really, revelatory. But so if you want to have, as I say in the book, the Alien versus Predator wedding or something really, really outrageous, go for it. But don't do it with this deadly theater idea in mind that it's about the result. It should be about expressing yourself and about connecting with.
Well, you've already got the results in most relationships. You have the results because you're dating somebody for a period of time. You're checking out whether you're compatible to a certain degree. The results are already there now. I mean, it's not like I think the term in Irish used to be, if you wanted to propose to somebody, you'd say, hey, would you mind being buried with my people? Because you're in different parishes and you lived around a parish, right? Since medieval times. It's not like that anymore. It's not like a transactional exchange of goods.
Right. Well, wait, and that's what I say in the book too, is that it was the most inspiring thing to me was at our wedding, our straight female friends, several, who were ambivalent about having weddings of their own because our traditions still have traces of that age-old tradition of a man dragging a woman by the hair down the aisle and throwing her at the feet of another man.
You mentioned your Aunt Connie, right? And you mentioned Liz.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. As a kind of beginning of the book about what weddings were assumed to be.
Right. Yeah. And how Connie, my Aunt Connie, Elizabeth Taylor was at her first wedding, and which I guess was a sort of normative affair. Why not? That's what everyone else was doing. But Liz was there, and I think cursed her because then she ended up having as many weddings as Liz did. But she learned so much about herself each and every time she tried and failed, and she's been in an incredibly loving relationship based on equality. It's completely expanding and enriching for both of them. And it's been for decades now. She's very happy, but it came hard earned. And she had to focus on, the underlying meaning of the event and the event of creating relationship versus what the result, what the expectation from society was. But my female friends at our wedding, they were afraid of just kind of sleepwalking through these traditions that are very, based on women as property, basically. And they were like, oh, but when I saw yours, they realized, oh, it can be about celebrating your relationship and the equality between the two of you. Like us, they were best friends with their partners. So they were like, okay, we can do it from the ground up our way. And they did. So
from the ground up, I think is the way to put it, right? Like instead of having expectations, right? Societal or otherwise. Yeah. Do it from the ground up.
And focus, again, theater comes into this because with good theater, the first question you ask is, what is the event? And again, if it's just two people in an empty space, there's still an event there. You start with, what is this event? And then whatever comes of that, it could be, then the sky is the limit, but it should always be expressing what the event is and not hiding behind anything. Yeah.
Well, yeah, not hiding is the thing. Yeah. Okay. Well, so creativity is a huge part of this. I think that when I work with patients or when I meet somebody, I want to hear something about their creativity. What do they do that's creative? What do they do that's exploratory? Because it's only in exploring the world will you be able to explore yourself and grow as a human being, I think. And I think creative parts of our mind and creative activities allow you to do that. So creativity in planning a wedding. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it's necessary really to carve out space for yourself so that you are really meeting your goal to be both alive and connected. You really have to be creative to do that. I think straight couples, sometimes heteronormative couples, are sometimes at a disadvantage in terms of, in this very specific way, in terms of the option to hide. When people say, I'm not really thinking about the wedding planning, I'm letting him do it, or I'm letting her do it. It's like, that's a really bad idea because you're denying yourself the opportunity to be present and to figure out, oh, what are the ways in which I'm not fully alive? What are the needs that are not being met? And how do I creatively figure out a way to let more of myself be there and be present and invite other people in at the same time? Because that's really what it's all about. It's that Jessica Benjamin, the psychoanalyst, would call it mutual recognition as this goal of sort of, how do I take up space and invite you to do that at the same time? And you kind of miss that opportunity when you're not taking up space and you're not giving yourself the opportunity to be creative. And, queer people in general, same-sex couples, I mean, we don't have that option where our choices to take up space are provocative by default. So there were no traditions in this case, right? So I couldn't even hide. It wasn't an option to hide behind wedding traditions when my husband and I got married. So we had to be creative, but it's salvational, to your point, but I think it's salvational the same way it was salvational for us planning our wedding. I think it's salvational for everyone, like you're saying with your clients, because the creative, it's that creative adaptation that allows you to really exist, and to maximize the potential of people to connect with you.
Well, I think that's just a good way of looking at life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I wanted this. I have a friend who got her PhD in literature, no intention of getting married, and she read this book and she actually enjoyed it, which I felt like was a really good endorsement. And that, because that was really what I was up to. I didn't want to just think about marriages or just about weddings. I really wanted to think about how we take up space in our lives. How do we ask for recognition? And by doing so, you're really inviting everybody else to be more of themselves too. But you have to risk provocation sometimes. And one of the inspirations for the book really also was, again, these straight female friends of mine having weddings that were inspired by ours. Several of them made me a bridesman at their wedding, which wasn't as I guess it's more commonplace now, but it wasn't back in 2012, 2013. And that was really pivotal for me and kind of revelatory in my thinking on all of this, because, it's such a silly tradition actually to split people up by gender. It's about tribes coming together. And so if you're best friends with the bride and you're a man, you should be on the bride side. But as we didn't rehearse the recessional, but as we were walking off 2 by 2, the groom traditionally is holding out his arm for each bridesmaid as they go. And I was face to face with this lovely man, friends with the groom. And I was like, I know you are a fan of improv, and a practitioner of improv, so you'll appreciate it. But I was like, I had this improvisational moment where I was like, you know what, I'm going to offer him my arm. And I did. And I think what my instinct was, which was effective, was to make the inevitable discomfort one of focus on the actual event and what it was about, as opposed to the surface appearance of it. Because on the surface, it just looks like, okay, he's trying to squeeze into the wrong size shoe. He's trying to be a bridesmaid. And that makes us uncomfortable. But if you mix it up, then you're just focused on the event. The tradition doesn't matter. You've exploded the tradition. And it was effective. And that's when I wrote an article called How to Be a Bridesman for HuffPost at the time, and got Dan Parent, the Archie comic illustrator. He created Kevin Keller, the first gay Archie character. And he drew these awesome pictures. And I thought, this is a great idea to talk about, a great way to talk about this idea of exploding gender roles, not to be PC, not to be kind of novel, but as a way of just looking at, as you said, a way to live a life, to focus on the event and the meaning, at the risk of great provocation. And are we willing to do that? So in a way, it's a call to people to really take that risk and to really, as you're asking yourself, what does this mean to me? What do I want from this? Don't get shut down, don't get shut down by that thought that's like, oh, I don't want to be seen as that kind of person, or, it's you have to take the risk to make the event known, that the meaning.
Exactly. Yeah.
Meaningfulness.
Well, I mean, weddings are so scripted anyway, and to break out of that mold to have some improvisation within it, right, makes it more alive. Yeah. And the improviser comes, right? Things happen. Unscripted events are the ones people remember in the wedding.
Yes.
Besides the video, which of course it's all about the video now.
It is.
Excuse me. But yeah, it seems like you're right. It's kind of the difference between, I don't know, like My Dinner with Andre, which is two people talking to each other, versus, I don't know, Cats or something, some sort of big event.
Right.
Right.
With no meaning.
Well, I think that T.S. Eliot's poems had some meaning. I'm not quite sure what. They were fun. They were fun. Cat poems. In between the wasteland, he found cat poems. Well, like, kind of bringing this back now, like, I think we touched upon it a little bit, but like Roe v. Wade overturned, this book do you think it might be fitting to do a second edition or some addendum, maybe talk a little bit beyond weddings to maybe like polyamory or some other ideas? Like, I don't know if that's it's certainly not outside of the realm. Maybe some examples, because polyamory seems to be becoming more accepted and an experienced way of exploring yourself as a human being in relationships.
Right. I think I tried to put in this one. I would hope that someone who's in a polyamorous relationship would see themselves in this current version, because really it really is about claiming where you're coming from, regardless of how that's affecting other people. So I really hope that that's in the text now. As far as another edition, I think this one hasn't done its job thoroughly, if given the trend of the Supreme Court right now. And I hope just more people maybe read this one and get the point that it's about our values as people. It's not about laws as much as it's about our value to love, to be seen, and to see other people at the same time. And we need more of that. And it's the spirit of the law, or the idea or ideal of the law, rather than the letter of the law. Yeah. And, Richard Posner, who a federal appellate judge, conservative judge, in 2013, he wrote a very passionate piece for the New Republic, conservative publication, in favor of same-sex marriage. He had come out on, against it in the 90s, but he used the same rationale for both articles that he'd written, saying that we have to follow what's happening in culture. How is life showing up in culture? And, big decisions, legal decisions like that, like marriage and who gets to be married, really have to follow how are we living and who's alive and how do these laws affect their lives? And it's a really interesting perspective from someone who tends to be conservative. But I think there isn't enough focus on that aspect of it, that it's about life.
Yeah. Well, I think people can be conservatives and have an understanding that conservatism doesn't mean you want to go back, to being a Bedouin interpreting, scrolls in Hebrew. It can mean that you just you reckon that there's a pretty good need for order in society, mm-hmm. and fiscal constraint. I think that's kind of like what I always thought that as. Of course, there's other people who would disagree with that. And I think we need more people who are able to kind of put two and two together and not think so dichotomously, politically or otherwise.
Yeah. And it comes down to yourself. I mean, again, are you, and that's what I'm asking in this book, are you participating in your life in a way that's helping you get what you need? Or are you being ruled by something inflexible? That's making you feel like you're in control. And you can see that dilemma so clearly as a couples therapist. I mean, even just this week I was working with a couple, and it was so clear that one of them was so, actually both of them at different points, was bringing a kind of threat into the discussion about like, well, if you do that, you know what's going to happen, kind of thing. And there's an inflexibility to thinking that way, that it has to be just like this. And what I tried to help them do, and it worked for a little bit, was getting them to see, you're going to have more leverage for the other person to understand you, which is really what you want to be understood, if you kind of ease up on that threat and that shutting them down. So I just would wish that people who are shutting people's lives down and are on the side of doing that would just consider that it doesn't leave room for them to take up space and to be recognized.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, hopefully people will catch your drift, as they say. Yeah. In Archie Comics Land or something like. I think they used to say that, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, Mark O'Connell, as always, wonderful conversation, wonderful writing. Just you're a gem of a person, and I wish you all the best. Anything else coming up for you in the near future? Are you going to be doing any trainings or anything like that? Where can people find you?
MarkO'ConnellTherapist.com, and I have a few. I have a list of trainings that I do online, upcoming in the next few months. I train therapists. I give acting techniques for therapists. So,
excellent.
Yeah,
always needed.
Yeah,
get our heads out of the books.
Yes, and aliveness.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much. Happy Pride Month.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. Did you know you can find us on the web all over the place? Well, maybe not all over the place, but you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us at Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, loads of places. Please look for us, and if you can, subscribe, like us, leave us a review, send us a comment, a criticism. Hey, we like to hear a lot from people. Go ahead, talk to us. That's why we're here. By the way, this is just a reminder to let you know that all of the material here is for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you do need a therapist or a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.